AA Beyond Belief is a podcast by, for, and about people who have found a secular path to sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. Welcome to the Wednesday Secular Speaker Series. Today you will hear from Tom S., originally from Alabama, now living in Kansas City. This is a talk he gave at the KC Secular AA Speaker Meeting in January of 2019.
Okay, well, thanks for coming, everyone. And my name is Tom, and I'm an addict. And that's probably one of the things that I want to address first is that I'm always a little bit hesitant to speak at an AA meeting because I don't have a drinking history that is going to be very involved, but it was almost exclusively drugs for me. And I apologize if that... if because of that you can't relate or anything like that. But so I grew up in a small town in South Alabama, about 10,000 people, and so pretty normal, elementary school and high school, and I had always had a girlfriend all through elementary school, and really I did all through high school. But along about puberty, I began to realize my attraction to other boys, men. So when in my town, when you leave sixth grade, you go straight to high school. So and I was just terrified of this going to high school, because in the seventh grade you have all grades. I had seniors in my physical education class when I was in high school. I was in the seventh grade. And the rumor was that the seventh graders were all going to have their pants ripped off and run up the flagpole. And so that was a fear too. However, soon I began to enjoy physical education as, it was a chance for me to peer at other boys and everything, and I was kind of realizing that what I was hoping it was a phase, but I didn't know anything about it or anything like that. So I was hoping that it might go away one day, and that everybody, maybe everybody goes through a phase like this. But it didn't go away, and of course, I've always joked that in my town, like, being gay would be, akin to, or let me put it this way. I always used to say that the guy who robbed the liquor store and shot the clerk would be more respected than a gay person in my town. So, of course, I kept that all quiet, and and whether, and this will this will come up because it has, my story has a lot to do with, my story with drugs has a lot to do with sex. So, in college, I smoked some marijuana in my freshman year, but I didn't get off. But finally, I kind of came out in my, the summer of between my junior and senior year in college, and, had sex for the first time, and started going to Atlanta. I went to school at Auburn, which is in Alabama, and it's about 2 hours from Atlanta. So I started going to Atlanta a lot, and So I would like go to Atlanta on Friday night, stay till the bars closed, and then come back, go to a football game on Saturday, then go back to Atlanta on Saturday night and stay till the bars closed. Like rolling down windows and doing all kinds of things to keep myself awake while I was doing all that driving. But I just got, I was given pot. And so in my senior year, I got off on pot, and I had been drinking, and I noticed, like, all during my fraternity parties and all that other guys seemed to get a lot more fun out of it than I did, because I would get, when I got to where I could feel it, I would enjoy it for about an hour or so, and then I'd get really hungry and I'd want to eat, and then I'd want to go to sleep. And then the next day, it was always at least a 24-hour recovery for me. There was no question about, after I had been drunk, was I going to go to class the next day or anything like that. I was praying to the porcelain goddess the entire day. So when I discovered pot, that was like, oh, now I've got something that I can do at parties. But immediately, my friends changed. And this was back in, like 1973, 74. And it was kind of like, it'd be kind of like, so, okay, I became a person that you were cool if you smoked pot. And, you kind of like would say, hey, do you smoke? Oh, yeah, I smoke, all this kind of stuff. And so, but I abandoned my other friends. And so I was in ROTC in college. And so I immediately went into the Air Force right after college. I was a pretty big whoop-de-doo in ROTC in college. I was like the cadet commander of Air Force, Army, Navy, ROTC for this big presentation, celebration, and all this kind of stuff, even though I had begun smoking pot and hitting the gay bars on the weekends. And so when I got into the Air Force, I was in pilot training, and so while I was flying these planes with an instructor and all that kind of stuff, I thought, this is not going to be a very good pot smoking job. So I began to think about, well, okay, now what do I want to do, that would be a good pot smoking job? And so, and immediately, by the way, when I started smoking pot, I never expected as much from me after that. It was like my whole self-esteem, or what I thought that I might become, all of that was never the same. So I was thinking, truck driver, I bet that would be a good pot smoking job, especially since I seemed to have a joint everywhere I went in the car, which is ridiculous. So, Douglas, maybe you can identify with that. I mean, because it's just, it's dangerous for that too. But it seemed like a good idea at the time. So I eliminated myself from pilot training and became an administrative officer. And but right the night before I started pilot training, I need to go back. That was I was stationed in Selma, Alabama, of all places. And I used to go to Atlanta on the weekends. And so I was at this guy who let me stay at his house when I would go to Atlanta, and he was having a party, and he gave me, there was a little bit of powder on the end of a knife, and he gave it to me just to swallow. And so that was when I first discovered meth. And we never mentioned the word meth back then. We always called it crystal, a nice sounding word. And so I thought, and I identify, like, here's the point where I identify a lot with people whose drug of choice is alcohol, because immediately I thought, where has this been all my life? I know what's wrong with me. This must be how normal people feel. And so I was, I felt better looking. I was a better conversationalist. I had deep conversations that night with people that I couldn't stand. I just thought this was, I've said this before, so what's wrong with me is I've been suffering from a meth deficiency, a crystal deficiency. And so I thought that was the answer. And of course, it turned on me. I got caught during in the Air Force with a test, a urine test. They called it Operation Golden Flow. And I got caught, and I lied my way out. The base commander called me in, and he said, like, there were 2 positives in the test, and Lieutenant Sawyer, one of them was yours. And I go, mine? Why? He said, well, you tested positive for amphetamine. So I go, amphetamine? What could that be? And I said, oh, well, I was in Vancouver. I was stationed in Upper Washington State, right on the Canadian border. I said, well, I was in Vancouver last week, and I was going to go skiing the next day, and a guy gave me this diet pill. He said, he said, take this and you won't be tired. And I said, I thought a diet pill was just something you could buy. I didn't know that it was anything wrong with that. Just lying through my teeth the whole time, knowing exactly what it was. But so I had to pee for a month in the, every week for a month. But I did, get myself out of that. But even, during that month, I was thinking of all kind of ways, like how could I scheme to be able to do some crystal and not get caught in the urinalysis. But after I got out of the Air Force, I went to graduate school, and I was only there a couple of quarters, and then I dropped out, and I moved to Atlanta, which is where my disease really took off, and where I found that I could purchase it for a pretty cheap price. And so there it began to affect my work. And in 1980, I went to my first meeting, and it was an NA meeting, and I was talking about this the other night. I think that I couldn't identify with anybody in that meeting, and it was a smoke-filled room, and people brought their children who they needed to bring their children in order to get to a meeting, and so I looked down on them for bringing children into a smoky room like that, and And I hated the part where you said, I'm Joe and I'm an addict, and everybody goes, hi, Joe. I thought that was just cheesy. But anyway, I went to meetings on and off, and finally in 1986, I went to treatment. And I went to a treatment center that a lot of medical people went to. After the treatment, it was a 30-day treatment, and I went into a halfway house, and this is not the halfway house like you might think. It's a halfway house where you have to pay dearly to get into it, and then there was a three-quarter house, which meant that you could work. So I did all of that, and I began a period of sobriety that lasted for I think around 17 years. And this was started in 1986. I met some people in treatment that I became close with. And I moved to Kansas City after I had celebrated 1 year sober and started going to meetings in Kansas City. I go to Live and Let Live. And the main meeting that I went to here was on Friday night. And down at the there's a church, Grace and Holy Trinity. You saw me there, I think, and it was a meeting where nobody new ever came in, and we would talk for a few minutes. And unless something was bothering anybody, we would adjourn to the Chinese restaurant, which was down the street from where we met. And I mean, it was kind of good because a lot of good talk. A lot of good recovery comes in the coffees and the dinners after the meeting and all of that. But anyway, so And I had a good job. I was working for Sprint here, and so I had kind of a meteoric rise through the ranks of Sprint and was making good money. And so at some point, I started sobriety started losing its priority with me, and I started thinking about all of how sex was not that great, and I wasn't having any. I wasn't motivated to go out to have any, and I was thinking, here I am, a red-blooded American gay male, and it's Saturday night, and I don't even want to go out and hunt on the hunt. So, eventually, that's what took me back out. I decided that I deserved it. I've been sober for a long time, and I deserved it. And so it started kind of with a drug that I was being prescribed for. I started taking antidepressants with Prozac back in 1990. It did wonders for me. I did not continue talk therapy because I thought, okay, this is what I needed, so I don't need to do that anymore. So it was extremely helpful, but not helpful enough that, and I wasn't involved in the program enough for it to keep me sober. So I was prescribed this. I asked for if there was anything for ADD that wasn't addictive, and so they prescribed this drug for me. And I won't even tell you the name of it, so I won't give anybody any ideas. And it was, but anyway, I started with 1 a day and then 2 a day, and 2 a day was my dosage. And pretty soon I was taking 8 a day and so on. And I was, telling the pharmacist that I needed to refill because I was going out of town, and so I became addicted to this drug, and I finally told the psychiatrist that, and it turns out that this particular drug for people who are addicted to crystal methadone, it kind of mimics the effect of that. So, but that took me back out to crystal. So, I stayed out a few years, and along about 2007, I was not doing well at work. I had a meteoric rise, and I was beginning to miss assignments. I was beginning to show up late, and I had a talking to from Human Resources and my manager about what was going on, and I said, I realized that, I'll straighten up, all this kind of stuff, and so there was this test that I was trying to pass this test for project management. It's called the PMP, and when I failed that test for the 3rd time, I finally decided to confess to Sprint what was going on because I was an excellent student, like summa cum laude, all this kind of stuff. And each time I thought I had passed this test with flying colors. So I didn't want them to think I was stupid. So I finally told them that I was, addicted and all this kind of stuff. And I went to treatment. And so Sprint was going to have layoffs around that time, and it was the year that I had this particular issue, and performance was going to be what the layoffs were based on. So I decided that I would take a package, which meant that I could volunteer to be laid off, and ended up getting paid for a year not to work. So, which was just a wonderful time to use when you didn't have to be anywhere in the morning, and you could be sick and not go to work, but nobody was expecting you or anything. And I was going to do all this stuff like work on my recovery and my acting and all this while I was not working. And it turned out that it just got really, really, really bad. So I tried several times to go back to meetings, and I would get a few months put together. And finally, in 2008, right, in July of 2008, after a bender of about 4 days, you keep going. You don't want to stop. You don't want to sleep. I called my old sponsor and told him that I wanted to quit. He immediately fired me, and he told me who that I thought should be my sponsor, who he thought should be my sponsor. I thought it was a terrible idea, but it was kind of a turning point for me because it was the first time that I actually did anything that I was told to do that I didn't think that was the way I wanted to work my program. So I asked the person that he told to be my sponsor. So that started this period of sobriety. Now, this period of sobriety is much better for me than any period of sobriety that I've, all during that 17 years, I was probably maybe sober for 5 to 7 years of that, and then maybe dry drunk the rest of the time. I just wasn't using. But this time, things began to click for me, and it took a long time. It took over a year before the psychic change happened, where I started working at Garmin, and some of you have heard me tell this before, but I hated my job at Garmin, and my supervisor, when we did our first annual review, he asked me what were my goals for the next year, and I said to get another job. And I've had some level promotions, but basically 10 years later, I am still doing that same job at Garmin. And along about a little over a year, I began to think about how I liked the people I was working with and how I was helping people, because I was helping people with their products that they were having problems with. And I had a lot of, when I was at Sprint, I was on projects that lasted years, and then they would decide, you'd be 2 years into it and they'd decide it was a loser. And, but from a business case perspective, and so they would just cancel it. So I had, each call for me to a customer was a chance for to end something, to start something, and finish something every day. So, and then about, I can't remember how long ago, if it was 3 or 4 years ago, I found this group. And I kind of was looking for this group because at my home group, which was Live and Let Live, every now and then they would get this wild hair and decide that they needed to be true to AA and not have any addicts at the meeting and stuff. So I started looking for it, and I remember going to John and talking to John about it. And I think even when I wasn't here, maybe you talked to other people about, whether you thought that would be okay. And so I'm extremely grateful for the fact that you guys let me come here to an AA meeting and say that I'm an addict and participate and reap the benefits of it. I say that during this period of sobriety, the part of the promises that has come true for me is the part about we will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. So, being a card-carrying speed freak, when I first started in AA, the serenity just didn't sound like anything that I really wanted anyway. That was like quiet and sitting in a rocking chair on the front porch and all that kind of stuff. But, I finally, in this period of sobriety, learned that peace, I describe it as having peace, whether I'm in an activity or doing mundane things. My dogs have meant a lot to me. I've had spiritual connections with my dogs. And so I've just really enjoyed being sober, especially during the time that I've been here. Now, it's not a bed of roses, and in fact, in the last few months, I've been feeling squirrely, and I need to start doing some things that have gotten. I need to stop some bad habits that have gotten back a hold of me, like procrastination. I need to do my hobbies more. And because I'm finding myself at home with a lot of time to think, and as we all know, we were talking about the saying "think, think, think" at the Friday meeting yesterday, and we were talking about how I think every one of us kind of agreed that that "think, think, think" slogan wasn't too advisable, and I know what you probably mean is like think it through. And when they say think, 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 but that comes across to me as like sit around and think, and which is it's like I really do better if I am not thinking, So for me to be distracted. And distracted with things I like. I like my work, and I like golf. I like my acting. I need to get more involved in that. But I'm not in any kind of danger at the moment of using, but I'm not overconfident either. I know that at some point I could be presented with an opportunity and have a hard time turning it down, but. I don't know. Am I at 20 minutes yet, or am I short? Am I short of that?
You can go on for another 10, or.
Oh, I'm about. I think I'm about done. I just want to thank this group. I love this group, and the Free Thinkers meeting. It's been a tremendous help for me, and. I love all of you people that come to these meetings, and I think I'll pass.
And that's another episode of AA Beyond Belief. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to help out our site and podcast, there's a couple of things you can do. First of all, go over to iTunes and leave us a review, hopefully a favorable one. You can also help out financially with either a recurring or one-time contribution. You can do that by setting up small recurring donations at our Patreon page at patreon.com/AABeyondBelief or through PayPal at paypal.me/AABeyondBelief. And you can always visit our site, aabeyondbelief.org, and click on the donate button. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back again real soon with another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast.